our final NFL playoff contest over at Underdog Fantasy. That's what we're doing today on RotoViz Overtime. We're drafting in the Gauntlet 2. We are jumping in and trying to attempt, Shawn, to win that $50,000 top prize. Obviously, this show coming your way on Friday, the 12th of January. We're recording this one Thursday afternoon on the 11th of January. And we're just a couple of days away, Shawn, from what is now Super Wildcard Weekend. It used to be Wildcard Weekend. Now it's even bigger. But I'm pretty excited because my Packers will be playing. I know they're heavy underdogs versus the Dallas Cowboys, with your Chiefs also playing. And what looks to be going to be, you hinted at this earlier this week, tragic weather conditions, I think. But we'll talk more about the games, I guess, as we get into the show. We'll be doing our draft in a moment. But the main focus is going to be looking a little bit at the start of Shawn's article that is priming you if you are drafting into these contests over the next couple of days. He mentions all the best options for exploiting underdog playoff ADP ahead of the wildcard round. So, Shawn, before we get into the article and the draft, got to be pretty excited for this weekend, the playoffs being here. I always think that it's all between the divisional and the conference round. They're both, I like the divisional round because there's more games, obviously. But once the playoffs happen, it's just the hype ramps up every week. This should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, you mentioned the divisional round, obviously a round that includes the two favorites with the 49ers and the Ravens. I'm excited. I mean, we have some great games this week. You mentioned the Packers, the Chiefs, Dolphins, even with that weather. And you mentioned the weather. I mean, I have family members in Kansas City who are, a little worried just about the weather for, normal life reasons.
Day-to-day.
There. It is going to be rough. But we have an Eagles-Buccaneers game that is lower profile, but should be kind of fun. We have a Browns-Texans game that I think projects to some fireworks. And, I mean, you've got this incredible Joe Flacco narrative with a very strong Cleveland Browns team otherwise. And then you have the best story in football with CJ Stroud and the Texans. So many cool games happening this week, including a game with the Detroit Lions and the Los Angeles Rams, where you have two power teams there. Even some, as we record at least, even some mutters that maybe Laporta could play a little bit in that game. I hope that they hold him out and that the Lions are able to defeat the Rams anyway. And then they get after the Cowboys, or the Cowboys are just gone and they have maybe the Buccaneers in round 2 with your Packers. Obviously, in the case where they pull an upset, they would be heading to the 49ers. So it's going to be a tough path for Green Bay. But again, so many great games. Speaking of great games, if you haven't played a ton of Underdog yet, they have contests in the playoff version going right now. If it gets a little bit tricky to keep track of those, you can go to the article. I have the entry, the first place, and then how it works advancing through those contests. Obviously, Colm, depending on how many teams get through each round, might cause a few tweaks to how you build your lineup. Obviously, we've had quite a bit of fun content here. I've written about it a number of times. You and I did a show on it recently. I was able to join Blair when we had a great discussion with Sacrilegious on the Fantasy Football Report. So many things you can go to there to calibrate yourself and figure out how you want to put these teams together. But Colin, the big thing that we're looking at now that we have the playoff matchups set and we have new ADP is that the continued collapse of the Eagles and the injuries that they have, the question marks. And it seems like all of the players will actually play, at least again, as we record this on Thursday. But Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, maybe none of those guys are 100%. And then you have a situation where DeAndre Swift has not been a huge impact player of late. You put that together with the fact that their defense has been one of the worst in football. And Colin, the Eagles do not look like a power team. You also have a situation with the Miami Dolphins where their injury issues have been, more or less apocalyptic. They have some questions with Jalen Waddle, with Raheem Mostert. It does again sound like those guys will play, but maybe not in a way that makes quite the same impact for you. But really, the defensive side of the ball is the story there, where they had a defense that caused a lot of problems for people, and especially in certain circumstances, so many injuries to where it's just not the same team. So now this idea that the Dolphins, especially after they fall to the 6th seed and they have to go on the road to the Chiefs, they're going to be having to go on the road to other elite places. If they advance, that makes them a less interesting team in a contest like Underdog, where you need to have the right team build in the Super Bowl to win big. And then the third team there, I think, with Laporta going out with the issue where they aren't able to secure the number 2 seed, in part because of the officiating, that the Lions are less interesting. And Colm, when you have Jalen Hurts, Tua, and Jared Goff all becoming less interesting to the point where, I've seen Jared Goff not drafted at all in the 10 rounds. I've seen Tua go extremely late. You will get Hurts extremely late. That has an impact on the rest of the ADPs. Obviously has an impact overall, but it also very specifically has an impact on what you can now do with the 5 elite quarterbacks who remain.
It really does. And you mentioned some of the injuries, and Shawn, and looking at the injury reports and looking up different information and news, it is just a case that there is so many of these teams who I'm sure are very envious of the 49ers and the Ravens with that bye, because even both of those, Christian McCaffrey and Zay Flowers, for example, players on both those rosters who are trying to get as close to 100% as they can before next weekend. But Miami, you mentioned the defensive side of the ball, a number of key players lost for the season, late in the season. And just looking around the board, even with the Packers, when you're setting up some of these contests, you've Christian Watson, Willie won't play, Dobbs, Willie won't play, Jalen Reed has had his injury issues. There's just so many players around the board. As we record this on Thursday, no training today or no practice today for AJ Brown. So questions as well with Devontae Smith, but he is practicing. So just so many questions around. And you mentioned Sam Laporta. I think it's a case that's probably just to keep the opponent trying to have to use all their resources to plan for. But the one thing, Shawn, that I do think is obviously greatly positive since we recorded on Monday is, it's not one of it's not an ACL tear or an MCL. It's not a surgery requiring injury, which at that time when we recorded on Monday, that was still the fear. So that is positive. And if you're playing and setting those lineups, all those things come into your discussion, particularly as well if you're playing over at the FFPC. They do have the FFPC Playoff Challenge back for its 21st season. There's 2 great contests, the same awesome format. There's no draft, no salary. Choose 12 players from the 14 teams and watch them ride through the playoffs. The $200 contest has a record $500,000 top prize. That is $500,000. And the $35 contest has a $100,000 jackpot. Registration is open through kickoff this Saturday, January 13th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. The pool is filling fast. Head on over to myffpc.com.
But Colm, what's the second prize that people are going to be competing for after you and I win the $500,000? We did a couple of shows on that earlier in the week. Have an article that will be out as people are listening to this. Can't say enough about this contest. Colm, we enjoy both of
Shawn,
these so much every year.
We just check what the first prize is and we leave it from there. All joking aside, though, it is that is a joke, but it is vitally important as well. We talk about the advanced structures in these, and one of the things I like about a lot of this best ball contest over at the FFPC is the payout structure in them as well. But just checking up for you here, Shawn, in terms of that second place prize, because there is quite a tail off. It is $100,000 to second, $50,000 to first. So it is quite top heavy. But if you're in the top 25, it's $2,500 upwards. So make sure you're in the top 25 and you'll be pretty happy with your 10x payout and that one. But Shawn, back to the article and looking at what we're focusing on for this particular draft. You have touched on quite a few bits of it there, but one of them being that it does look like Baltimore may be the answer to all your draft questions. The other part is you mentioned the draft or the collapse of some of the kind of potential secondary juggernauts. And then even with that, the weather concerns, I guess, even though it would only be for 1 week between Miami and Kansas City. And then the ADP has been impacted, because while you potentially could get values on players 2 weeks ago who maybe now have either got in and their extreme values or missed out, different question marks around how players will be involved in the NFL playoffs themselves. That makes it very tricky to build some of these teams with the current ADPs as they have settled post week 18.
So, Colm, as we look at the top 3 players in this contest, do you have a preference for the way to play it? One of the things that I mentioned in the piece is that it is a little bit easier to chart your course if you select Lamar Jackson, because you know you have the Ravens as the framework. You know you have your QB. You don't have to be worried that other drafters are going to break your lineup. One of the things that has been very interesting to me is that over the last couple of days, I've drafted a lot of teams where I took either McCaffrey or Lamb, and none of those 5 quarterbacks came back. I also have leagues where I've drafted Prescott or Patrick Mahomes in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th rounds. So for those 2 players specifically, you can get a very wide range in terms of where they fall to you in any given draft. You're sort of hoping that if you start with McCaffrey or Lamb, that, A, that you could get maybe a Brock Purdy to come all the way back, but B, that if you have Lamb, maybe you could push Prescott. Certainly, if you do, you're hoping to not have someone jump out and take the 2 QBs. One of the things that you can't really control in this contest, but you hope for, is that there isn't a wild card drafter in there who is maybe building a team that is not optimal for themselves, but also creates a lot of problems for other managers in the draft. But if we
Shawn,
start
this is the listeners are probably, especially the ones on Twitter, are shouting at their devices at the moment, because this last week, this feels like that has been the discourse on Twitter. You have put it much more kindly than some of that Twitter discourse around people just jumping in and ruining these drafts for everyone else.
Yeah, you have to keep that in mind. So I've pushed it and gotten lucky and built teams that I do think are fairly powerful compared to what's usually available. I've pushed it and missed. And so then you're taking some pretty long shot types of builds, but you do know how you would recover and at least maximize the chances if those long shots do happen. But I think we're essentially looking at 2 different types of pieces here. One is that you're building Ravens, and then off of that, you have these 2 games. And again, it's going to be more than 1 round. But when you're looking at the Dallas Cowboys, you're looking at the Detroit Lions, if you still have some confidence in them without Laporta. That's one of the things that really has shifted for me, is that the Lions are probably my favorite play. Once you remove Laporta, not only does it decrease their chances for winning that in multiple games, but it also ruins the depth that the Lions had to give you multiple kind of outs as you go through. So if you're playing Ravens, then it really needs to be, in all likelihood, some type of Cowboys or 49ers. Off of that, you're excited that those games, at least initially, have Cowboys, Lions, and potential shootouts, with the weather not being as much of an issue. If you're going with McCaffrey or Lamb to start, then it's very difficult now that Josh Allen is more or less in the first round, certainly not coming back to you hardly ever. So you can't really play those teams with the 2 star QBs in the AFC, which I think makes them a lot less appealing. Obviously, you can play Lamb with Dak Prescott, but I think the Kansas City Chiefs are the team there that you have to really plan for overperformance, and you have to draft as though they're going to overperform. Colm, the Chiefs have a very wide range of potential outcomes because they do still have the vast majority of the key pieces that they won a Super Bowl with last year, certainly that they've been the dominant team with in the AFC for multiple years. They've dropped a huge number of passes. It's cost them a lot of games. It's changed how people look at them, but their defense has actually improved. They also now go into a situation where, and I'm not even necessarily saying this is guaranteed to be a good thing, but when you look through the AFC and as it develops, the Chiefs are not going to be a favorite. They're going to have a little bit less pressure than they've had both in past postseasons, but also during this season, where as soon as you loosen up and are like, we didn't end up with the 1 seed. We blew it. We allowed the Ravens and the Bills to get ahead of us there. We're going to be an underdog. If the Chiefs are actually still the best team in the AFC going forward, I don't think that would shock people. So I think that that's the way. So you have a couple of different paths. Do you have a preference when we look at McCaffrey, Lamb, and Jackson as the top 3 guys? Anybody stand out there as someone that you have to click on if you get a chance to get them?
Yeah, I think it's in that order. I think it's McCaffrey, Jackson, and then Lamb. I think the reason it's tricky with the Jackson one missing out in the first week as well. The advantage is you're going to get them in that second round. But I do like them in that order. So depending on if you're in first, second, or third spot, I think that's the way it's probably going to play out. We'll see, Shawn, typically here, maybe we'll end up with the 5th or 6th. We've been getting the back draw on some of these contests. But the part before we get into the draw that I want to highlight, you do mention a couple of tactics. And sometimes, Shawn, we forget to just share the simple stuff when we're doing it. You mentioned this at the start of the article, but it's so vital to build a team that's going to give you a full Super Bowl lineup, because that's the goal. You're going to draft a lot of teams in this contest that are going to be not the winner. They're going to be dead on arrival, after the wildcard weekend here. But building teams that give you that full 5-person starting lineup, so 1 quarterback, 1 running back, 2 wide receivers or tight end, and then 1 flex. But the other part is how you build those teams. So build the teams to try and keep the players away from each other as long as possible. You mentioned creating squads with exposure to 2, 3, or 4 NFL teams with no more than 2 in the same contest. So you're trying to avoid basically eliminating your players as you move forward. The longer you can keep them in, the better, and then avoid players who will face off in the first or second round. So that then, once you start from who you take at that first pick, it's really going to determine a lot of what you try and do the rest of the draft. Now, that may seem obvious in terms of stacking. If you get Christian McCaffrey, you want Brock Purdy. If you get CeeDee Lamb, you're going to want to try and get Dak Prescott at some point. But it's that part about who you want to pair them with and who you want them to face off against. And the thing that you mentioned there, when you're looking at the AFC side of things, I think the Chiefs point that you made is very valid, because it's really the Chiefs. I think the teams outside of the Ravens that get there rather than the Ravens will be the Chiefs or the Bills. And I think based on price, I really like what you can get with the discount on both the quarterback and then some of the other auxiliary pieces. And those lineups, for example, Rashee Rice going off the board in the 5th round, Diggs usually going off the board in the 3rd round, Mahomes going off the board in the 3rd round, Jackson going off the board in the 1st round. There's a lot of ways that you can play that second offense at a discounted cost. So if you can get the 49ers or you can get the Cowboys off that, I think it gives you a lot of pieces from 2 potential teams then to pair off in the Super Bowl at relatively affordable costs. And the other part, is that the offenses that are falling off a little bit that you mentioned, like Jalen Hurts with the finger injury, some of his players injured, banged up heading into this week, even if they do play. And then the team has been struggling offensively over the last 8 weeks or so. And then you also have the Miami Dolphins, who are also very banged up, and there's lots of issues they're playing against. I guess what you'd be saying there is you're putting your bet on the Chiefs side of things, but I kind of like how you've set that up. And I think that trying to target the Chiefs along with either the 49ers or the Dallas Cowboys. And because of that, the question that you asked previous about would I prefer Lamar Jackson side or the other 2 guys, with the tactics of trying to get into the Chiefs later on, I think that makes it more optimal to go with one of the other 2 in those opening picks. But we'll jump in or is there anything, Shawn, before we jump in the draft you wanted to add in finally on the article? Or will we talk about the magic portion that you mentioned later in it during the draft?
Yeah, we'll see kind of how that goes. One of the things that does heavily determine now, because things are so much more defined than they were even very recently, the draft slot that you get. Colm, I managed to do a huge chunk of teams in the last couple of days and land almost exclusively either 1 through 3 or 6. And then the additional teams where I got 5, Josh Allen went before that. So building through Buffalo hasn't been something that I've had as many opportunities to do. It'll be interesting to see if we get that today. The Bills are also fun in their own way, especially if you want to fade Stephon Diggs, which I think is the way to do it, because then you can get Cook, you can get that NFC complement, and you have players like Kincaid and Shakir late who, they're not nearly as inexpensive as you would like or they would have been recently, but they are viable options to still allow you to do some other things. And especially if you have a team without bye week players, and one of the possibilities that you would go with Josh Allen would be to come back with at least one 49er. But if you do that, then having to spend middle round picks on Kincaid and Shakir doesn't necessarily keep you from having the overall punch on your lineup that gives you a chance to win. So we'll dive into it here. We'll see what we have to do specifically with our draft slot in order to give ourselves a chance
to win the $50,000.
To win the $50,000. Colm, what is your guess? What slot will we have today?
101. Influencer 101, Shawn. That's what we need to get here. I think after what we talked about, it would be ideal. We get the 104. That the thing is, Shawn, if Josh Allen would potentially go one spot earlier than normal, that might open us up to better picks throughout the rest of the draft. So we've talked about Christian McCaffrey, CeeDee Lamb, or Lamar Jackson. We did also mention Josh Allen. The other thing, Shawn, you could potentially do at that point is take one of the 49ers. What's a little bit tricky, you would almost want to take Brock Purdy and hope that one of the 49ers receivers would come back. The difficulty is if you take Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk, one of the drafters after, you can do the Brock Purdy, Brandon Ayuk part, which is another difficult step in the draft process here as you're looking through it. But I think that if the first three go as we expect, it probably needs to be Josh Allen. How do you feel?
Yeah, this can be a Josh Allen. It can be a Brock Purdy. Either of those teams.
How do you feel about that challenge of if you take, Brock Purdy and you possibly miss out on the two 49ers before they get back to you even at that? Any concerns with that in terms of building out a full lineup for the Super Bowl through the 49ers?
Yeah, I think that there is the benefit of pushing one of, Colin, we're going to get Lamar Jackson here at the 104. So he slides to us. We'll go ahead and click that. But you can take the 49ers receiver, try and push Purdy if you get both of the 49ers receivers, because Purdy goes without one of the players. Then you have it set up for 49ers Chiefs. Ideally, you're really kind of at the mercy of other drafters if Mahomes goes before you get that shot in round 3. We know his ADP right now about 14 overall. So by taking Lamar Jackson, we do have this Ravens build. We have a lot of things opened up to us in terms of how to maximize for both first round advance and subsequent round advance. Colm, this here would seem to be pretty clearly Zay Flowers to me. I read about that a little bit in the article. You can try and pivot to a George Kittle, but that's a lot thinner. Yeah.
No, I think it has to be starting in that direction. And what you could look to do is, Diggs goes in the next pick, then it's probably going to be the Hill, Kittle, Dak Prescott range to see if Mahomes will potentially get back to us. But there's also the potential that you could see a Kittle get back to you, and then that would become potentially interesting if Mahomes was gone. If it's a case here that Mahomes comes back, is he your preference? Then who are some of the secondary options that you would look to here in the third round to build out the team?
Well, once we have Jackson, we're looking at Cowboys and Lions and Rams as the interesting and potentially affordable pieces on the other side. So Kittle does go. It removes that possibility of trying to build out both Ravens and 49ers, which would obviously give you an extremely potent Super Bowl combination, which then you'd be pivoting off of to try and advance in the first round. When you get into the second half of drafts, Colm, I think that this is a bet on the team that is going to advance from Lions Rams in that first game. The Rams might be more powerful overall. The Lions might have it a little bit easier early on. Who do you like?
I'm going to let a filibuster onto Jamar Gibbs. I didn't know if you're going to make the change. That was going to be my preference. You had them shipped up with Williams and obviously then on the other side, Jamar Gibbs. So we take Gibbs. I feel in this situation, Shawn, with we talked about this a little bit, and I know you mentioned the Rams potentially beating out the Lions this week, but I still feel like the Lions will do it, and Laporta potentially being out, I think it will be an advantage as well for Gibbs. The only downside to get, like, if Gibbs was in a situation where he didn't have David Montgomery, I think he's going in that, the second round, for example. It's just we're in a situation here where he's splitting that workload. Pacheco goes, Hill goes, so we will be back up in 2 picks. Williams may still be available though, Shawn, but we don't want players who are facing off against each other. Are you looking towards Rice or Kelsey here? Both of those names available. We are after going with, and Williams did go off the board. We went with the Lions so that we kind of rule out the likes of Puka in this situation and Cooper Kupp. Who are some of the names that we're chasing here at this particular point? I know if it was me personally, and again, I know I've mentioned Chiefs earlier on. I'm after going through the realization, Shawn, that we took the AFC quarterback in the first round, so you can ignore my suggestions there. Player-wise, my favorite player here would be Rice, but who makes the most sense at this particular point as we're sitting on the clock?
Yeah, so let's go ahead with Rice here, who is far and away the best player available and gives us a chance to build potentially a 3-team lineup or a 4-team lineup where we have Ravens, Chiefs, Lions, and then possibly even your Green Bay Packers there. Obviously, those 2 teams are not set up to play off against each other. That gives us this mix of potential elite Super Bowl lineup with an advance situation that is palatable. Maybe not ideal. The other thing that you can do is you can wait a little bit more and go with the Cleveland Browns and hope that the Dolphins spring the upset against the Chiefs, so you don't even have Ravens Browns squaring off in that next round. Colm, we do have to start adding additional pieces from the Ravens at some point. Gus Edwards is sitting there. He's not
here as well
an extremely exciting pick. And yet, if you don't, you're going to have the unexciting pick of Justice Hill or even Dalvin Cook at the very end of the draft. We also have David Montgomery sitting out there. I don't think it's impossible to play those Lions backs together in terms of how they might help you, even in the same round. They've scored together, but could help you through consecutive rounds as the Lions continue to advance. And certainly we're playing them as the potential NFC Super Bowl participant in this draft. Isaiah Likely, unfortunately, goes. That's, I would argue, sort of a mini dagger for us. Who do you like at the running back position?
I think it makes sense here to go Gus Edwards, unless you want to lock up the entire Detroit backfield. I would lean towards Edwards. We did mention that we didn't want Mahomes. Mahomes still available here in the 5th round. Could be interesting if it continues to last, but I think we go with Edwards and then try and come back with some Detroit players a little bit later, and then try and get some of the late options, like maybe a Bateman, to go along here with the Ravens side. The likely pick would have been an absolute no-brainer there for me if he had omitted those 2 additional picks, so that one is disappointing. Mahomes goes off the board 1 pick later, and that was what we were talking about with the other 2 teams, the ability to potentially go with the Cowboys or the 49ers, and then at this point, if you're getting Mahomes in the 5th round, I mentioned in the preview portion at the start that, sometimes going in the 3rd round, goes at the 29th pick, the 505, being able to build out a team through that is very, very exciting if you can do it with the Cowboys or the 49ers. Shawn, we are back on the clock. Some of the options here on the Lions side, for example, Williams, Laporta, I think it would probably be Williams based on. I don't know what the actual likelihood is. Are you confident that we might see Sam Laporta either this week or if they advance next week? I guess what I'm feeling is I'm not that optimistic.
Yeah, I think he's going to play in the second round. I also think he's going to last until the end. The same thing would be true with a Mark Andrews. So the question then,
it does sound with Andrews too. This could be again wrong. It does sound like it's only Super Bowl or nothing in terms of his recovery. It feels like at the moment. So we'll see at the very, very end with that one. But Laporta definitely, in terms of like trying to, I mentioned, earlier that the likelihood is your team isn't going to win this contest. So like it may be a case that the Laporta pick is a wasted pick, but if you have a chance to add him and he is back sooner and can have an impact, I think it's a real, dart throw lottery pick, whatever you want to call it, that you could add into a team here where you're building through some off the Detroit Lions. Since we picked last, Jalen Hurts, Devin Achane, David Njoku, Joe Flacco, Ferguson have gone off the board, Gabe Davis off the board. We are now up and on the clock again. Some of the options in the queue: Edwards-Helaire, Bateman, Reed, Aaron Jones, Sam Laporta. Some of those Packers names pretty interesting potentially. I guess I have more confidence in Aaron Jones out of the two of them. I feel like he'll get the majority of the work in the passing game, and he doesn't get a huge amount of receiving work, but I think that if it is a case that they are behind, that would be amplified as well. But has gone over 100 yards in, I believe, his last 3 contests since returning from injury. So that gives us another running back. We now have Gibbs, Edwards, and Aaron Jones. I guess we're building this through the Super Bowl, Shawn. So the hope is that Edwards is our Super Bowl running back. 3 running backs up. Edwards-Helaire is another option that's in the queue for later. Is it a case that at 3 we want to fill out the other positions, or what's your plan for the rest of the draft here?
Yeah, so we have Jared Goff going, and that's not necessarily a huge shock. He fits with the Patrick Mahomes team that selected Amon-Ra in the second round. I would have preferred, if that's me, to rely on Mahomes, but with it falling that way, we're now looking at Jordan Love as pretty clearly the guy who will get us through, since Lamar Jackson is obviously on the bye in that first week. So we go ahead and take Jaden Reed there. We have Reed and Jones. When we're thinking about building full Super Bowl lineups, we have Lamar Jackson, Gus Edwards, and Zay Flowers off of the Ravens. This ideally would be Jordan Love and then a Ravens player in the final round. Colm, I mentioned Rashad Bateman's combination of vertical ability and sort of interesting target profile over the last, say, 6 weeks as someone who maybe does a little bit more in this contest than really any other type of situation where you almost certainly couldn't play him. What are your thoughts on Bateman versus, say, an Odell Beckham Jr.?
I feel it's very difficult to know which one of those two is going to have a week where they're going to get in the lineup. But so for me, it's kind of 50-50, and the decision has been made. Odell Beckham went off the board. I would lean towards Bateman. Reading some reports today that Bateman at the start of the season came in with more severe injuries, I guess, even we thought they were severe. It seems like the reporting is that the team thought that he may not be available this season at all. So I guess he's worked his way through all that. They thought it might require another surgery. So I think it's for him now to get to this point. And I just think the upside with him is higher. Some of the stuff you point out in the article too, obviously leaning towards that. We know we have seen some flashes from Odell at points this season, but yeah, I would be going with Bateman. But if Bateman had gone, then we'd have been looking to fill out the lineup. We probably would have went with Odell Beckham. After that kind of long ramble, Bateman would have been my pick. So it worked out that OBJ went off the board. We do get Jordan Love, Shawn. That was, I think, 4 picks ago, but I've continued to talk here. So the one thing I think will be interesting to look after this is the Lions that we did take. What options, alternative options now that we filled out to be more of a Packers team than a Lions team? what options we could have potentially taken at those spots. So it'll be fun to have a recap of the draft board here. We do take Bateman with that pick in the 10th round. Sam Laporta did go off one pick before, so we had kind of pivoted to that it was going to be a Baltimore side to fill out that Super Bowl lineup, because one of the things you would like to do is be building, two teams that you're thinking are both going to potentially meet each other in the Super Bowl with the lineups. It could be a Lions or Packers in the Super Bowl, but it feels like it's a little bit less likely than if it was one of the other preferred options, like we talked about earlier in the Chiefs combination with the Cowboys and the 49ers. But Shawn, how are you feeling here with this roster as we get Lamar Jackson at 4, Zay Flowers, Gibbs, Rice, Gus Edwards, Jameson Williams, Aaron Jones, Jalen Reed, Jordan Love, and then we finish it off at the very end with Rashad Bateman. I think it's pretty interesting the way it's played out and how it's filled out. We did get the advantage of Jackson going that little bit later. I do like what the team in 3 has also done. They were the Josh Allen team. They got Stephon Diggs, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, DeAndre Swift, Jalen Hurts, Gabe Davis, who looks like he's going to miss this week, but then Dallas Goedert and Brandon Cooks. I think that's a very constructed team there. How do you feel about our team, though, before we mention anything about any other rosters?
I love the way that this has come together, because we have the pieces off of the Ravens that I'm really targeting. Now, the way that the draft could have fallen a little bit better would be to also get Isaiah Likely.
Yeah.
If you get Likely, if you push Edwards around, which I do think, certainly when you've already blocked off the Ravens as being interesting in some other contexts, you have that possibility. And then instead of using your final round pick on Rashad Bateman, you can go in a different direction and you have a stronger pick in round 6 than Jameson Williams. The issue and kind of the back and forth that you're looking at here is that the Green Bay Packers don't have a great situation for advancing in any individual round. And so you look at the fact that the Packers and the Lions are not going to face each other in round 2. And you think, well, maybe because they don't face anybody, right?
They're gone.
But you're drafting these teams with the potential to win the contest if the scenario plays out the way that you're looking for. So I love the fact that we have a Ravens team that is set properly. Off of that, we have Jahmyr Gibbs and Jameson Williams, who with Laporta out, maybe you have Williams as a bigger piece, and certainly you're expecting Gibbs to take up some of the slack there. So if the Lions flash and they're able to take out the trendy Los Angeles Rams, then suddenly you're back into the situation where I think you actually do like their chances against Dallas. Not saying that they're going to be favored, but obviously the Cowboys, when you look at a lot of these drafts, CeeDee Lamb, the number 2 overall pick, you're getting Dak Prescott early. And this one you get Lamb, Prescott, and Pollard all together. You're going to get better prices on the Lions, and for obvious reasons, but the Lions still work. So you have a Super Bowl roster that is appealing. You have Rashee Rice in a situation where, if you have Packers Chiefs as the eventual Super Bowl, then you're looking at a scenario where maybe, those are the guys who win. And again, that's pretty unlikely, but to have Rice off of that, to have Rice as a piece there that helps you for advance and balances this team properly, I do like that. And the flip side of having these 3 Packers is that while there's the possibility or the strong likelihood that it doesn't help you as much in other ways, I do think it gives you a great chance to get this Ravens-oriented team through. And certainly you're going to be facing other Ravens teams to get through later on in the contest. You're trying to figure out, how is your Ravens team going to stack up against those? For it to stack up well, you're going to need to have Gibbs and Williams be some pieces there. But it's a good balance for me. I like the fact that we have the Ravens heavy and then the 4 teams total in a way that makes sense, where again, if we get the right outcomes in the first round, these teams are not going to face off in round 2 either. And so from that perspective, I love how we look here. It's difficult, and that's one of the things that makes this puzzle so interesting right now, is that with the Eagles and the Dolphins collapsing, with the Laporta injury changing the Lions dynamic, everything is pushed up into those 5 other teams. It's going to be difficult to get the exposure to them in the ways that you might want. You're going to have to find some other solutions, and I think that we've done that in this draft.
Yeah, and we hadn't talked about the Packers side of it at all, before the show or at any of our other drafts, Shawn. I think this is the first one that we've gone and drafted some Packers. So I think we've pivoted very well to be able to, meet the requirements that we would have set out before the draft. Some of the things looking back, we took Rice, and I did say at the time, for the players there, he for me is clearly my most preferred target. And in terms of like the FFPC contest, I think he's going to be somebody who's a great pivot to lower ownership for particular players if people are looking to diversify there. But likely did go then before it went back. So we take Rice at pick 21, likely goes at pick 26. I was very confident that he was going to come back and get back to us because his ADP is usually around the 6th round. So he goes 2 picks ahead of us, and that's why we went to Gus Edwards. And hindsight, I'm always comfortable when we talk through these things of it, because I was not in the mindset of taking likely at that pick. And I think what we would do in these drafts is try and let it come to us rather than chase it. So I think, again, we missed out on likely, and I think that was unfortunate. But in hindsight, any feeling that you would have wanted to take likely over Rice there?
Yeah, I think that you can build it that way, and you can stay with the 3 teams. You get more powerful on the Ravens side. If you're going to go ahead and select the Packers, then you're betting on them to blow up in this round. And even if they don't win, which you do need, but if they don't win, they score a lot of points. I actually don't see a very clear path for them to not score well this week. I think Cowboys, Packers is a shootout that, not that the final score will necessarily be closer than people think, but there are more paths to them winning that game than I think most of the current models, projections, lines, what have you, are giving you. So that's one of the things that makes it a little more appealing. One of the things that you can do here is go ahead and make sure you have Jared Goff in round 7. That's something that will, again, keep you with the 3 teams. You select Jared Goff. Maybe you come back and take a Laporta in round 9 or 10. Again, the problem there is that Laporta doesn't work that well with the Ravens because you're adding an additional non-bye player who isn't going to play in this round. So that's the problem with having Ravens Lions. Again, we have to balance some of those types of things. If this is a draft where the Cowboys players are falling, where you have a shot at Tony Pollard instead of Jahmyr Gibbs in round 3. Now, Pollard is not nearly as appealing as one game type of situation. He would be more appealing when you think through how you can then add Brandon Cooks and Jake Ferguson at prices that are very palatable, and the Cowboys are more likely to get through and accomplish some of those other objectives. The flip side of it is that you're not going to have Dak Prescott, and you're hoping to get a Jared Goff-based team. So as we work through there, I think that if for no other reason, this draft is helpful because it allows us to see the complications, the contradictions that occur when you're trying to work through a Ravens team and you have the bye and you have to be able to successfully build off of that. But one of the things that I do like is it gives you the flexibility to go with the Rams. I think that probably the thing that you really want to do here is simply take Kyren Williams instead of Jahmyr Gibbs. That was the hardest question that we had to determine, because when you take Williams, then you still have the path to taking multiple intriguing receivers. You see that Puka and Cooper Kupp
and that was one that I kind of leaned towards, so I'll take the hit for that. But as the draft progressed, Shawn, all I could see every time a pick was coming up was Puka was staring at us, and then Kupp was staring at us. And you could have those three pieces if we had and we would have went that direction. If we take Gibbs over Williams, which was a 3-pick difference, then we're probably taking Puka over Gus and seeing what comes back, and then we'd have passed on Jameson. Well, we would have missed out on Kupp actually before the Jameson Williams pick. But then if we take Puka over Gus Edwards, then we're missing out on the additional piece for the Ravens. So that's the fun thing about a contest like this when it's in the draft format, is every time you move one brick, you have to, like, it's not just as easy as slotting them back into place. The other thing, Shawn, with the Packers team, we did fill it out, obviously, with a Raven and Bateman at the very end. For people who maybe are drafting and they're optimistic that the Packers could spring an upset after hearing Shawn say, not that they'll spring an upset, but there's some path to victory. Those 4 players, Shawn, at the end, and also going undrafted in this, Christian Watson, there's a lot of options for some of these later teams. One of the other teams that you had mentioned in the article was the Texans. There's some of these teams where you can get a lot of pieces for the wild card round in those last couple of rounds. If you've built your draft in a certain way, and you've seen in this how when we were going through it, then it's a situation where we miss out in golf and we have to pivot very, very late. Some of those teams that you're able to build a pretty deep team stack, but it may be one that only is to try and advance you through this week. But the advantage then is if those wildcard teams do spring that upset, you're heading into week 2 with an almost full lineup with the Ravens coming off the bye as well.
So, Colm, this was a fun exercise. I love doing these teams with you. As I mentioned on some of our pods to close 2023, my drafts with you and Underdog during the regular season advanced at an extremely high rate. So this gives me a shot to win the Gauntlet 2, the $50,000 first place. I appreciate you doing this with me. Always so much fun to have these co-drafts on Overtime.
Yeah, I had to laugh there, Shawn. It's like, I don't know, it's like trying to get some like Irish shamrocks or something, give some good luck towards these drafts. Hopefully this team does hit. We'll see. We advanced, Shawn, a lot of teams. We didn't hit any of the big prizes over at Underdog. That is what we're going to try and do with this one. If you are playing over the Underdog Fantasy, you can use the promo code RotoViz. That gets you a 100% sign-up bonus up to $100. We'll be back post the Super Wildcard weekend with our recap show. And again, I mentioned this in some of the previous episodes, and I had some people reach out with suggestions already. Any, subject matter, anything you'd like to see over the next couple of months, I guess, as we head towards the NFL draft through the playoffs here on RotoViz Overtime, send an email over our way at rotovizradio@gmail.com, or let me know on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. I also mentioned about anyone that people may be interested in seeing as a guest over the offseason. Let us know. We'll try and see what we can do with some of those suggestions. Again, share them over to us. That is going to do it for today's show. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. I will link the article that we mentioned at the start of the show in today's show notes. You can check that out as well over on rotoviz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.